So we're up to the Mishnah now on Daf Lamed, but you have to be careful here because there are three Mishnahs. So we're up to the second Mishnah, which is approximately 12 lines down from the top of the Yomi, on Daf Lamed Amud Aleph. Shlosha achim, shnai mehem nisuim, shtei achios, v'echad nasui l'nochos. We've had similar cases in the past. We have Reuven married to Rachel, Shimon married to Leah, and Levi is married to another woman called the Nachrit. She's not related to neither Rachel or Leah. Meis hanasui nachus. Now, Levi, who's married to a Nachris, I think we called her Sarah in the past. I'm not sure, but anyway, he dies without children. Now she, we'll call her, we called her Sarah, falls for Yibum to Reuven and Shimon. Kanas echad mibali achios. So one of the husbands of the sisters was now kones es ishto. In other words, he was miyabim Sarah Ashes Levi Umes, and now he died. He fills in some of the names. He says Reuven Shimon Levi Achim, Rachel v'Leah Achios, Nasa Reuven es Rachel, Shimon Nasa es Leah, Levi Nasa lo Isha b'Shem Sarah. Okay, we got that right. She'ena Krovas Rachel v'Leah. Umes Levi below Banim, v'Nafla Sarah l'Tnei Reuven v'Shimon v'Yibam also Reuven Umes. Right, so Reuven was Miyabim. If you recall, I think we touched on this yesterday. He was Miyabim Sarah Ashes Levi, and then Reuven dies. Now, once Reuven was Miyabim Sarah, then his wife Rachel, together with Sarah, fall for Yibum in front of Shimon. And now we have what's called Tzaras Erba, right? Rachel, who is Reuven's first wife, right? Reuven died. So Rachel, his wife, when I say his first wife, the Mishnah calls Rishona. I'm just following the language of the Mishnah. Rishona means before he was Miyabim Sarah. So his original wife was Rachel. She falls for Yibum to Shimon. Shimon is married to Leah. That makes Rachel achos ishto. So Yotzeis mishum achos isha. Therefore, Rachel needs neither Yibum nor Chalitza. But Shnia, right? Reuven married a second wife, which was Sarah Ashes Levi mishum tzarasa. She doesn't need chalitza as well because she is what's called a tzaras erba. Okay. So that we have. Now the Mishnah gets a little bit more complicated. Also, b'maimer umes. So we're not talking about Reuven marrying Sarah in the classic way of Yibum. Instead of using the method of Yibum, which is bia, he gave maimar to Sarah. Sarah, again, is the wife of Levi, the Nachris. And that means what? She tells you to relax. Be relaxed. Anyway. So she says what? So now he gave a maimar to Sarah, correct? Again, Levi dies. He leaves his wife Sarah. She falls for Yibum, and instead of Reuven being Miyabim Sarah, what did he do? He gave her maimar. Now Reuven dies, and once again, Sarah and Rachel fall for Yibum to Shimon. Now, as a result of the maimar, of Ruvain to Sarah, Sarah now becomes a Tzara, but that's only the Rabbanan, because again, Maimer is only the Rabbanan. I mean, it could be Beit Shammai would disagree with this, but for us, we assume that Maimer is only the Rabbanan. So the status of Sarah as a Tzaras Erva is only Min Rabbanan, and therefore Nachris Choletzes below Misyabemis. Again, as far as Rachel is concerned, when she falls for Yibum to Shimon, Shimon is married to Leah, she is, Rachel is Achos Ishto, she's an Erva, so she doesn't need Chalitza. But when we talk about Sarah, so Sarah in this case is not really a Tzaras Erva. Why? Because Ruvain was not the Yavim Sarah. He only gave her Maim. And therefore, she's only Ashes Ruvain on a Drabbana level. Therefore, she's only a Tzara to the Achos Ishto of Rachel on a Drabbana level. And therefore, the law is Choletes below Mitziabemis. And we need the Chalitza because on a Doraisa level, she is, when I talk about she, I mean Ashes Levi, which is Sarah, who's now Ashes Ruvain, only through a marriage, which is the Rabbanan of Zika. But on a Doraisa level, she falls for even from Levi, in this case to Shimon, and therefore, to be mafkia that Zika on a Doraisa level between Sarah and Shimon, we need Chalitza, but Velovis Yabemitz, because on the other hand, the Rabbanan, she is a Tzaras Erva. So on a Doraisa level, she's not a Tzaras Erva. I'm talking about Sarah, Ashes Levi, but on a Drabbana level, she's a Tzaras Erva. So therefore, we certainly would not allow Yibum because Min Rabbanan, she's a Tzaras Erva. On the other hand, to let her get out of the Zika without Chalitza, that we can't do because on a Doraisa level, she's not a Tzaras Erva. She falls for Yibum. The Zika through the marriage of Levi is still very active. So the Gemara says, Ha Su Lamali. Why do we need this Mishnah to tell me that if Ruvain married, so to speak, Sarah with Maimar, and therefore Midrabanan, Sarah becomes a Tzaras Erva, which prohibits Yibu on a Drabanan, Hainu Hach. That's exactly what we had, and what we could have derived with the Kavachon from the previous Mishnah. Why? Hashdu Mahasam. In the previous Mishnah, Deachos Isha Havya. In the case of the Yavam, that last Yavam, right? Havi Sarah Linachris. She became a Tzara Min Rabbana through Maimah to a Nachris. Right? So she was married to her husband in Torah beforehand, and she is the major wife. Like, for example, let's say Rachel is the sister of Leah, who is the wife of Shimon, and she became a Tzara Min Rabbanan to Sarah, who is the wife of Levi. Is Amrit, it already says in the Mishnah, Nachris Asura, she can't have Yibum, because the Maimar makes her into a Tzara Lachos Ishto Shel Yavam. So Sarah becomes a Surah Yibum to Shimon because she's a Tzara to Rachel, Achos Leah, who is Ashes Shimon. Is how much more so Hacha, the Nachris have Yitzara Leachos Isha Lo Kolshkin. Certainly in our case, where she became a Tzara Mirabanan through Maimar to Rachel, who's an Achos Ishto of Leah, and we're talking about a case of Achos Ishto Doraisa. She was the major wife, the first wife of Reuven. So Sarah, the wife of Levi, became a Tzara Min Rabbanan to Rachel, who's the Achos Leah, who's Ashes Shimon, and that's all Min HaTorah, Lo Kolshkein. How much more so that the Iker should come and generate an Isa on the Tafel. And Sarah, who's now the Nachris, has the same status as Rachel Achos Leah on a Drabanan level, and that makes her into an Erva because of Tzaras Erva. So the answer is Tana Hach, Tana Bereishit. We should take our Mishnah and put it earlier than this Mishnah. There's something in the transmission here of the sequence of the Mishnah is that's not accurate. So what do we do then? So then we're going to go from the easy case to the more complicated case, from the lesser chiddush to the greater chiddush. So now what we're going to do is achos eishes hayavam, which in the case of ikar nesuin, and that has the power to generate an isur yibum to the nachris, and that's going to be bereisha. That's going to come first. V'hach chazia le'atera. He says, if the first Mishnah is going to be the case of the nachris, and she's the ikar nesui ames, and we would have said that le'atera, we could be matter the nachris for yibum, because the tofel cannot generate an isra on the ikar, v'sharia, and therefore lo shonas as dina kidei shatiro sol is yamen. Now we're ready for the seifa, which we're going to switch the order. The hadar chazio lisura. Now there's an isra on the nachris who's married with Nesuin Gemurit, a complete Nesuin, Mitchila, from the beginning, because Vachos Eishes Hayamam, and therefore, at the end of the day, she's a Tzara, she's Asura Layom Mishum Erva. That's a real Erva Doraisa. The Aidi de Chavivale Aktebe. If there's any strange sequence here, it's only because Chaviv Haya. Chaviva means he cherishes a Chiddush Din, that the tofel can generate an iser on the ikar, and aktim, and therefore he organizes, arranges that din should appear tchila, but conceptually it's the other way around. So the first Mishnah was mentioned in that way, but the Talmidim, although they got used to learning the Mishnayos in that sequence, where the achos eishes hayavam was the ikar nesuin, and she generates an iser on the tofel on the tzara on nochris. So the Tana didn't want to change the girsa. Therefore, Mishnah lo zazim and cover. They didn't change the sequence of them. Now we're up to the third Mishnah here on Daf Lam. Shlosha akim shnayim nesul shtei achos. The echad nasui l'nachris meis echad mi bali ha'achios bekanas nasui l'nachris as ishto. So Ruvain dies, and he leaves his wife Rachel for Yibum. Levi, who is married to a Nachris, now is Miyabem. Kanas means Miyabem Rachel. Umeis ishto shalasheni v'achkach meis hanasui l'nachris. So Ishto Shalasheni, in this case, would be Levi. I'm sorry, Leah. I said Levi, I meant Leah. Because Shimon is married to Leah. Now, Levi was already Miyabem. He was already Miyabem Rachel, Eshes Ruvain. He also has another wife who's not a krova to Rachel, she's a nachris, her name is Sarah. So again, Ruvain dies, and Rachel falls in front of Levi for Yibum. Levi is Miyabim Rachel. Then Leah dies, she's the wife of Shimon. Achreim, base Levi. Levi now dies. And Levi is now married to two wives. He's got Sarah, that was his old wife, his first wife, and Rachel, who he was miyabim with the death of Reuven. So these two ladies, Sarah and Rachel, fall to Shimon for Yibum. And Lechora, you and I would have said in such a case that Shimon could be miyabim either Sarah or even Rachel, right? Because what's the problem with Rachel? Rachel is the sister of his wife Leah, but Leah's already gone. And once Leah's gone, he can marry Rachel, her sister. And yet, the Mishnah, to our surprise, says, Harei zo, we're talking about Rachel, Asura olav olamas. In other words, she has the status of an erva, vachos ishta, and she doesn't even need chalitza. How could that be? Why doesn't she fall for Yibum to Shimon now that Leah's gone? And the Mishnah formulates a new principle: Hoil v'nesra olav sha'achas. The moment that Reuven died, and now Rachel needs Yibum, and now she falls for Yibum to Shimon and Leah and Levi. But the only problem is, as far as Shimon is concerned, because at that moment Shimon's wife, alive and well, is Leah. She now is Achos Ishto Shel Shimon. So at that moment in time, she, Rachel, through Zikas Yibum, now becomes an erva, in which case Shimon could not possibly be Miyabim Rachel. Now the situation changes with the death of Leah. And what happened? Levi married Rachel, and now Levi died. So now Rachel is falling for Yibum to Shimon Mikoach Levi's marriage, Levi's Yibum. But already before that, the status of Rachel, before Levi was Miyabim Rachel, vis-a-vis Shimon, was Achos Ishto, and therefore Nesra Olav. And now we have a principle, Kevin Nesra Olav Shah Achas, Arezu Asura Olav Olamis. And the Gemara is going to try to establish a basis for this. So again, you and I would have said that after the death of Leah, Shimon is allowed to marry Rachel. If Rachel is falling for even from Levi, so forget about ancient history. Let bygones be bygones. So her relationship, Rachel's relationship to through the Nefila and the Misa of Reuven as a Yevamot, who is now Achos Ishto, that's history. That's no longer relevant because Levi was Miyabim Rachel, and Leah Ashes Shimon died. So now, why can't Shimon be Mekayim the mitzvah gedol of Yibum? And again, this is going to be relevant to both Sarah and Rachel, because once you establish Rachel as an erva, then Sarah becomes a Sarah's erva. But I just want to make one point over here in terms of the sequence. The Mishnah seems to be insisting that Levi was Miyabim Rachel before Leah's death. Am I correct? Let's just read it again. Masechet mibali achios v'konas nasi l'nochus es ishto meis ishto shel Hashem. So again, I'm not sure that there's any great significance to the fact that Levi was Miyabim Rachel before the death of Leah. I don't know if that's significant, but one thing I think is very significant here is that Leah, Ashes Shimon, had died before Levi died. You see that? Because it says, Achakach meis hanosi l'nochus. And why is that significant? Because there was one point in existence in which Leah had already died and Levi was still alive. And you and I would have said at that point, Ashes Levi as a potential Yibum case, if Chashon Levi dies, that already sets up at least a potential Yibum situation between Rachel and Shimon's wife is gone. So at that point, there's no heir of Achos Ishta. So let's just think for a second. If Levi had died first and then Leah died, would it make any difference. Yeah, because if Levi had died first, Rabbosai, listen to this, then Rachel would have fallen for Yibum to Shimon during the lifetime of Leah, which would mean that Mimanavshah, either the status of Rachel, again, I'm talking now about the relationship between Rachel and Shimon. If you talk about the Zikas Yibum at the moment that Reuven died, for sure, insofar as Rachel being Achos Ishto is Nesra, there's no Heter Bir, no Heter Yibum. But now you want to shift it because Levi was Miyavim Rachel, but Levi died before Leah died. So that means when you talk about the Zika of Rachel to Shimon at the moment of Levi's death, at that point she's Achos Ishto because Leah is still alive. So I think it's very important to read into the Mishnah and emphasize the sequence here that Levi died after Leah died. Correct? You see that? Which means that you could have argued that since Leah is out of the picture and Levi's still alive, now Levi dies, and therefore the force of Zikas Yibum between Rachel and Shimon is now coming from where? From Levi, with the death of Levi. And at that moment in time, namely when Levi's gone, Leah's not alive either. So that there could be an afil for Yibum of Rachel to Shimon, Mikoach Levi. You'll tell me, but Rachel is Achos Ishto. Yeah, she was Achos Ishto at one point in time. And that was the Zikas Yibum of Rachel to Shimon from Reuven. But now we have a new substitute. We have a new marriage relationship here between Levi and Rachel. And now we can generate a Zikas Yibum from, as it's generated from that marriage relationship. And therefore, once Levi dies and Rachel falls to Shimon for Yibum, Shimon is not married to Leah anymore because she's gone, then there should be a possibility of Yibum. And the Mishnah, the Mishnah coins a brand new phrase over here, correct? Hoil v'nesra olav sha'achas. Since there was one moment in time when the status of Rachel vis-a-vis Shimon was an erva, meaning an erva that would completely undermine Zika and put her back into the status of Eishes Ach. That one moment in time it impacts Li'olam Vod, such that Rachel can never become Muteres to Shimon, even though we have a new Zikas Yibum now that's coming from Levi. And at that moment in time that Levi died, Shimon is not married to Rachel's sister because she's not around. But it doesn't matter, since with Reuven's death, at that moment in time, when Rachel fell for Yibum after Reuven died, her relationship to Shimon during the lifetime of Leah, his wife, is that of Achos Ishto. And Keva Shenesra Olav, Shuv Nesra Liolamis. Keva Shenesra Olav Sha'ach. Rav Yehuda Marav, Kol Yevama she'enani kori ba b'chas nefil Yevama Yavaleh harei ke'ishes ach sheyesh la banim v'asura. And basically, what we're hearing from Rabbi Yehuda, the name of Rav, is exactly what we saw in our Mishnah. That what happened the moment that Reuven died and Rachel fell for Yibum to Shimon. At that moment, is Einani Koreba Yevama Yavole. There was already an Afila in which Rachel fell for Yibam to Shimon and Nesra Ol, because Shimon is married to Leah, her sister. So let's just think. The Gemara is now going to embark on a study of whether or not we need this statement of Rav, meaning, can we derive this from our Mishnah? Rav is saying what? Yeah, but here in our Mishnah, there's a second Nefila. Right? Because Levi was Miyabim Rachel and Levi died. So, Einani Koriba B'Shas Nefila. So again, what should we ask? Should we ask? The two ways that you could ask the question. One way is to say that according to Rav, why do I need the Mishnah? But I think with the Gemara is going to have a different agenda here. Once we have the Mishnah, why do I need Rav? You follow my logic here? If you only had Rav, I don't think you can derive the Mishnah. Because Rav, just again, right, Rav puts all the emphasis on Shas Nefila. But that doesn't tell me anything about our Mishnah, because our Mishnah has a different Shas Nefila. In addition to the Shas Nefila with Ruvain's death, Rachel falls for Yibam to Shimon with Levi's death, because Levi was Miyabim Rachel. But the Gemara is asking the opposite direction. If I have the Mishnah, then I certainly know Rav. What is Rav adding to the Mishnah? So the Gemara says, "My kamashman tnina, harezu asura of alomis hold an esrol of cha'achas." Wow, the tema hani mili. When does that Mishnah apply? Heichadalo ichazila b'nefila rishona. Well, heichad ichazila b'nefila rishona. Ema tishtere. So if we change around the sequence a little, let's say, just one second. When Levi was Miyabim Rachel, Leah was alive, correct? That's what we saw in the Mishnah. Let's go back to the Mishnah. It says V'kanas nasui l'nachus as ishto, and then it says V'achakach meisa ishto shalatzri. Right. So at the time of the Nesuin, meaning of the Yibum, time of the Yibum, at the time of the Yibum of Leah, of Levi, the Miyabim Rachel, at that moment in time, Rachel was already Ashes. Rachel was already Achos Ishto of Leah, Ashes Shimon. Let's just think. What would have been? So let's see. Hani Bili, go over it one more time. when does Rav's principle, no, I'm sorry, when does the Mishnah apply? Right, Ma'udetema Hani Mili, when does the Mishnah's rule apply of Holvin Esrol of Sha'achas? That's case of the Achazila. Right? The Lo Achazile Benefila Rishon. Again, Rachel is the sister of Shimon's wife, Leah. Therefore, when Rachel, with the death of Reuven, falls b'yibum, is lo chazil, right? Lo chazil means that Rachel could not fall for yibum to Shimon, because now Shimon's wife Leah is a law. Now Levi goes ahead, and he's miyabim Leah. I'm sorry, he's miyabim Rachel. Now, after his yibum, Leah dies. So that's what we're going to say. That's when we'll apply the principle of Kevon, etc. is Nesra Olav Olunks. Aval Heicha B'Echazil La B'Nefila Rishona. He says here, Kigon Shemesa Leah Esha Shima Lifnei Sheyibem Hanosui Lenochris, meaning Levius Rachel. Let's say Leah dies before the Yibum, right? That wasn't the case in our Mishnah. And in our Mishnah, what happened? He was Miyabim, and then Leah died. Do we have that? Right? Umesa Ishta. Right? Kanas Umesa. Right? That's the sequence. Kanas Umesa. If Leah had died before Levi's Yibum, so it wasn't Kanas Umes, right? Umesa, I should say Mesa in feminine to make that clear. Right? If it was, so in our Mishnah, it was Mesa after Kanas Umesa. I should write that on the board, right? Kanas Umesa. But let's say it was Mesa v'Kanas. Mesa v'Kanas. Then what? Mesa v'Kanas. Oh, Mesa v'Kanas means what? That when the Zika is still active, right? Because Levi has not yet implemented Yibum. And Leah is gone. So the death of Leah should be matir even the Zika of Reuven. In other words, right, Rachel was married to Reuven. And Reuven died. So that marriage between Rachel and Reuven should propel, what's her name? Rachel for Yibum to Shimon, because now Leah is gone. And therefore Ema Tishri. So the Havmina was that in such a case, Rachel should be Muteris Liyibum. Why? Because Leah had already died before the Yibum of Levi. Right? So what do we have over here? Are we together here? We're racking our brains to figure out why in the Havamina, in other words, before this tradition of Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rav, why did we think that if Leah had died before the Yibum of Levi, the situation would change? What was the Gemara pushing for? Ema Tishtere. And those are the two key words. Ema Tishtere. That Rachel should be allowed to have Yibum with Shimon. Why? Because Leah died before Levi was Miyabe. So since at that moment that Leah dies, now the Erva relationship of Rachel to Shimon is removed, and we can go back to the original Zika to Reuven. Is that really feasible? I mean, again, the diak in the Mishnah is a beautiful diak. I mean, the Mishnah says it was Kanas Umesa, correct? Should write that down. Kanas Umesa. If it would have been Mesa with Kanas, then if I only had the Mishnah, I would say maybe Rachel could be Messiah Bemes to Shimon, because Leah died during this period of time that the Zika was still active. When Levi was Miyamin first, and then Leah died, then we apply the principle of Kevich and Nesra B'Shas Nefila is Nesra Olams. Why? Because Levi was Miyamin, and only afterwards Leah died. In a case where Leah died first, before the Yibum of Levi to Rachel, then what happened? Then she falls for Mikach Reuven. Is that what's then? She falls for Mikach. See, I think what the Gemara is saying, I'm afraid to say this, that Shas Yibum, right? We spoke about Shas Nefila, correct? Is that the Lashon of the Shas? Or did I invent that? Let me just see. Correct? So what does that word Shas Nefila mean? That phrase. I'm tempted to think, I want to speak it out because maybe this is crazy. That Shas Nefila means Kolzman Shazika Kayems. When right, you have a fireplace and you take out a coal, right? So the coal is still hot. It's still active, even though it's not in the fire. So you have the Shas Nefila, that's when the ember came out of the fire, and then the ember is still hot, and you'll burn yourself if you touch it. So there's an extended period of Shas Nefila until the Zika from Reuven's death is removed by either Chalitza or Yibum. That's called Shas Nefila. So we're not contracting Shas Nefila to one moment in time. Now, if Leah dies before the Yibum, then that Zika is still what? It's still an active Zika. Why? Because the Shas Nefila continues. There was a blockage at some point because Leah was Baruch Hashem alive and well. And from the perspective of that period of time, we had an Erva situation where Rachel is Achos Ishta. But if the Zika is still alive and Rachel dies, Now we can call it Shas Nefila, right? Because nothing has happened yet. Meaning, with the Yibum with the Yibum of Levi, Shas Nefila terminates. Shas Nefila extends until Yibum. Now Levi was Miyavim. Oh, if Levi was Miyavim and Shas Nefila is terminated, then she, Rachel, was Asura L'Shimon during the entire continuous period of time, which is called Shas Nefila. So in that case, we have our Mishnah, and our Mishnah says that Kevin Shenesra, the Shas Nefila, Nesra Olav Olamus. But now we're going to switch it around. Now we're going to say that Leah died before the Yibum. If Leah died before the Yibum, then we have a Shas Nefila where there could be Yibum. And that's what the Gemara says, Ema Tishtere. Ema Tishtere. Why? Because now within the framework of Shas Nefila, we're having a long Shas Nefila now, Rachel became Muteres L'Yibum because Leah died. Come along Rabbi Yehuda and Rav, and now we redefine Shas Nefila as the very moment of the death of, in this case, Reuven. So at that moment in time, when Leah is still alive and well, Rachel's status vis-a-vis Shimon is that of a Yevamot who is an Erva, V'chosisha. And then we're going to activate the principle of Nesra Shalom B'Shas Nefila is Nesra Olav Olamis. Even though Leah dies and now there's a heter in the Erva V'chosisha, so now there should be a heter in Yibum? No. So we're redefining Shas Nefila in the light of Rabbi Yehuda Amarav. But if not for Rabbi Yehuda Amarav, we only had the Mishnah, and the Mishnah was very meticulous. And we had Konas Umesa, indicating that we have a situation in which there was no moment of a heter Yibum during the Nefila of the Yibum, but had it been the reverse and it was Mesa before Konas, we'd apply an extended period of Shas Nefila, and we would have said it's not necessarily Shas Nefila, because within the framework of the Shas Nefila, there's a heter Yibum, because Leah died before Levi was Miyabim Rach. So the Gemara asks now, Ha Nami Tnina. Now this is a Mishnah apparently later on. Shnei Achim Nisuim Shtei Achios Umeis Echad Mehem. I don't know. Doesn't seem to be a third brother in this case. There are only two brothers, if I understand correctly. So one of the two brothers died, and at that point we have an erva of achos ishto, because two brothers married two sisters. The achar kach mesa ishto shel Hashem. Right, so let's say Reuven dies, and now Leah dies. Leah Eshes Shimon. And the Mishnah says, Harei zo asura olav olamis hol v'nesel of sha'achas. Oh, so now we go back to Shas Nefila Mamish. if you follow me by Mamish, not the Lubavitcher Mamish. I mean, that Shas Nefila, if we isolate that Shas Nefila, then Leah's still alive. And V'achakach, Mesa Leah. So that in Shas Nefila, the status of Rachel was already that of an Erev of Achotz Ishta. Is Asura Lavalamis. So we see from this Mishnah, we can already derive that conclusion that that bombastic Kiddush that you wanted to derive from Rav, that Shas Nefila means mamish, pinpoint the moment of Nefila for Yibum with the death of Reuven. Such that even if Leah dies before Levi's subsequent Yibum, it's already Nesra Allah b'Shas Nefila because, right, even though Leah died before the Yibum of Levi, it doesn't matter. Because we're going to focus all our energies on the Shas Nefila Mamish. And that we've already learned from this Mishnah that we'll get to on Daf Lamed Beis. So Gemara says, Mao de Tema, if I only had that Mishnah, Hassam, who the Idchi La Mehai Beisel Agam, Hacha, Klo Idchi La Mehai Beisel. So now the Gemara is introducing another concept called Idchi Le Mehai Beisel Agam. So Reuven dies, and now all you have left in the pot is Shimon. There's no third brother. And Shimon's married to Leah. So at the moment of Nefila Liyibum, namely at the moment of the death of Reuven, Rachel's status is Idchile Mehai Beisel Legam. But Hacha, I think the word Hacha is going back on Rabbi Yehuda Marav. Let me just think about that for a second. Hacha. Yeah, and the word Hach is a little bit confusing to me, but I think he means the Chiddush of Rav is in the case where you had a third brother, Levi. That Rachel's status is that of an active and permissible Yibum. Why? Not to Shimon, but rather to Levi. So when Reuven died, and we isolate the Shas Nefila, Rachel, in terms of the bias, indeed falls for Yibum. Correct? And why does she fall for Yibum? Because of Levi. Levi is married to a Nachas. His Ema, if not for Rav, I would have said the following. Migu de Chazia Lahai, Nasu Lenochis, meaning to Levi, it's Chazia Nami Lahai. Now we're talking about Rachel, is Re'uya Li Nase L'Shimon. Migu de Chazia Lahai, Chazia Nami Lahai. This is unbelievable. We're not talking about Shimon over here. We're talking about Rachel. Do you follow me? Rachel is a Gavra. And that Gavra is included in Yibum. And we're not going to apply the principle of Nesra Shalachas if she had a head to Yibum. Even though, again, her head to Yibum was vis-a-vis Levi. She never had a head to Yibum vis-a-vis Shimon. Because Shimon is married to Leah. And the Havamina was before Rav that her status is it repels the status of Nesra of Shalachas. Well, what do you mean? Nesra of Shalachas, who's the Olav? The Olav is Shimon. Very strange. Migu de chazi lahai, etc., is chazi nami lahai. What's for migus? We know about migu in the case of Shimon that could have said parati and instead he said ladam, or he could have said ladam and he said parati. That's a migu. But what's the migu here? The chazi lahai, chazi lahai. I mean, as far as Levi is concerned, as far as Shimon is concerned, she was never chazi at all. I mean, she was Isha's achosish. What's the answer? That there's halacha bias, right? So we look at the bias, and the question that we ask is was she bounced out of the bias, so to speak? Was she totally psula and disqualified to the bias midin erev? And the answer is it depends. This bias is made up of two players. We have both Shimon and Levi. So she's not bounced off for Levi, she's only bounced off for Shimon. And from the perspective of the bias, she's included in Yibum. So we're going to use the Migu now. We're going to say, well, Rachel was a suitable marriage partner for Levi through the midst of Yibum. Because Levi is married to a Nafis. And now we're going to say that Rachel, even as far as her Erva relationship to Shimon, it's not a total Erva. I don't know how to say it. It's like there's already a dent, a little bit of a hole in the balloon. There's a little bit of a, probably you're okay. You add the word probably. It's like, probably you're an Erva, but maybe you're not an Erva. Why? Because maybe, Levi will be miyabim her, so she's already included in Yibum, and Shimon is a partner to Levi in the bias. And maybe there'll be a new situation will arise where Shimon could actually be miyabim Rachel before. Again, we're not hoping that Leah, dies, but so that's why I think the Gemara is putting all the emphasis on idchi le mihai beisel legam. If there are only two brothers, there's only Reuben and Shimon, then there's no way, no how that you can talk about her falling at the Shas in the field, Rachel's falling as Chazi L'Bayis. What do you mean Chazi L'Bayis? There's only one member of the bias. So the bias for Yibum exhausts itself in Shimon. He's the only player in town. So we can't put a dent in the Shas in the field. As far as the status of Rachel is concerned, vis-a-vis this bias, she's an Erva. She's not in the suitable, a candidate for Yibum. Mashenkin, if we have Levi, and now as far as the bias as a whole is concerned, Rachel's status is what? Is that she's really Yibum because of Levi, so she's not bounced out of this bias. Now the question is, who could be miyabim? Huh? Okay, right now we only have one person who could befall be miyabim. Shimon has a problem; he's out. But Rachel is waiting for Yibum. As far as this bias is concerned, Rachel is waiting online with bated breath for Yibum. Right now, it's going to be Levi. If Levi's out of the picture, let it be Shimon. But Shimon is married to Leah. No, Shimon's not married to Leah anymore. So if I'm not mistaken, the Gemara, we're not extending the status of Shas Nefila, like we said before, when we only had to deal with one Mishnah, with our Mishnah. Now we're going back to another Mishnah that comes later on, and we're certainly limiting Shas Nefila to that moment in which Ruvain died and Rachel fell for Yibum, but Rachel falls for Yibum in this Havamina to the entire bias. And the halach of hol ve'idchi or kevin shenesra asura lamis has to be viewed according to this Havamina within the perspective of the bias as a whole. And you can't say Nesra Olamis. You could say Nesra Olamis to Shimon, but that's not even Olamis. But you can't say Nesra Olamis to the bias because there's a third brother, and that's Levi. A mashmalon. Oh, so let me read to you the Kamashmalon here. The Mesifti writes, Leficha kol al rav, the Omar shekol Yevamot shenesra sha'achas einen iteres li'olam. So I would add a few words here. I didn't read the next part of the sentence. Shenesra olav li'olam. Let's limit and single out her relationship, Rachel status vis-a-vis Shimon. Let's not look at the bias. Let's look at Shimon. And it's Nesser all about Shimon. Later on, Leah dies. That's irrelevant because it's Nesser all about Shas Nefilo. But what does he say? Shegabi ofen zeh ein Rachel hayevama muteres linasi l'Shimon balachosa. One second. How do we read this? Shegabi ofen zeh ein Rachel hayevama. Muteres linasi l'Shimon balachosa. Leah, okay, Shemesa. He says Mishum Shalo Hutra Lo. See, that's how I would bold the word lo. I think that's where all the emphasis is. Lo as opposed to the bias, Bishas Misas Ruvain Bayis. Okay, then. So let's just see if we can chaprayim. How many Mishnayos are there on this page? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, we're up to the 4th. Shlosha Achim. Shnai mihem nisu l'shtei achios v'echad nasi l'nochri. So far, it's identical. But gereish echad mibali ha'achios es ishto. Let's say that Ruvain divorced Rachel. Right? And Shimon is married to Sarah. I'm sorry, Levi is married to Sarah. And Umeis Levi, Nasi L'Nochos, right? Uknasa Hamagarich. Umeis. What was he? Was Machzir Grushaso? Is that what happened? What's Knasa Hamagarich? I don't know. That doesn't make any sense.
First brother, and then there's third wife.
Oh, good. So Levi dies, right? And Levi is married to Sarah. And now Reuven, who had divorced his wife, Rachel, now is Makayim the mitzvah of Yibum with Sarah. Okay. So what happens now? Umeis. So now Reuven dies. Now if Reuven dies, wait a second. So Reuven already died before. Am I right? 1 second. It says, no. Reuven's alive and well, and Levi dies. So Reuven had divorced his wife, Rachel. So now when Reuven dies, he only has one wife. He's only married to Sarah. Correct? So wait, so Sarah now falls to Yibum to Shimon. So what's the problem? There's got to be a problem. Otherwise they don't pay me a salary, which they don't anyway. But anyway, so what's going on over here? He says, Uknosa Megarish Umes. Suisha Amru V'kulon Shemeso Disgarshu Tosei Mutaros. So it goes back to the original Mishnah. Oh, I see. The Gemara is going to try to figure out what the chiddush of the Mishnah is by limiting the case of the Mishnah and deriving a different scenario. But in this scenario, what happens is that just 1 second, that Sarah, just 1 second. So now Reuven died, and now Rachel falls for Yibum to Shimon. Just 1 second. So 1 second. Reuven had divorced Rachel. Okay, so Reuven divorces Rachel. And then Reuven is married to Sarah, and now Reuven dies, and Sarah falls for Yibum to Shimon. But I don't understand why do we have to introduce Levi into this picture? I mean, why didn't you say the following? Reuven married Rachel, divorced her. He has another wife. I don't know where from. Who cares? Why do we have to know the whole story about Levi dying here? Why are we introducing Levi into the picture?
And there's an equal
Between whom and whom? Remind me.
between the unrelated and
Okay.
this lady is dying.
Okay, but again, it seems to me that the whole point here is that Reuven has a wife who's not an erva to Shimon. Reuven dies and she falls to Shimon. He was once married to Rachel, and then he divorced Rachel.
One moment. Fine. First.
In other words, although Reuven divorced her, but again, Mitch, why do we have to introduce Levi into this? I still don't have. I mean, Jeff is right that Levi introduced another element of Yibum here, but it doesn't sound to me like it adds anything. I mean, even if Levi was never born, I think it's coming the same finish that if Reuven divorces his wife Rachel and he's married to some other woman who I don't care where she came from, she flew down from heaven. With the death of Reuben, that lady falls for Yibum to Shimon. What does that have to do? Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, maybe at one point she was a Tsaras Erev, right? Because that was before the divorce. Yeah, but here, wait a second. Maybe the sequence is important. Yeah, but again, I don't know why you have to say it with Levi, but maybe that's just the case. All right, so Melina, tomorrow we'll pick up the Gemara here on the bottom of Daf Lamed. Tomorrow is what? Is Wednesday? Wow, how did that happen? Okay. Very good. Okay, gentlemen, so have a great day. And